The southern border is collapsing under unprecedented pressure. Just recently, former President Donald Trump unleashed one of his most scathing criticisms yet of the Biden administration's immigration policies, as multiple southern states declared their infrastructure, resources, and communities at a breaking point. This isn't just another political skirmish. What's unfolding along America's southern frontier represents a fundamental test of federal authority, state sovereignty, and the very nature of immigration enforcement in the United States. And what Trump said reveals a battle that goes far beyond border security. But to understand why this moment is so significant, we need to look at the extraordinary convergence of crises now overwhelming border states. For months, governors in Texas, Arizona, and New Mexico have been sounding alarms about resource depletion, overwhelmed social services, and communities struggling to absorb unprecedented numbers of migrants. What began as warnings has now escalated into declarations of emergency, with state leaders invoking constitutional arguments about their right to defend their own borders when the federal government allegedly fails to do so. Trump's statement came during a rally in Texas where he stood alongside Governor Greg Abbott and delivered what observers are calling his most comprehensive indictment yet of Biden's border policies. The former president didn't mince words. He described the situation as a deliberate catastrophe, an orchestrated invasion, and a betrayal of American sovereignty that he claims will be remembered as one of the greatest policy failures in modern American history. As Margaret Brennan noted in her analysis on Face the Nation, Trump's rhetoric has shifted from campaign trail hyperbole to what appears to be a carefully constructed legal and political framework for potential executive action should he return to office in 2025. The specifics of Trump's criticism centered on several key points. First, the sheer scale of border encounters, which according to Customs and Border Protection data have reached levels not seen in decades. Second, the alleged collapse of interior enforcement, with Trump claiming that the Biden administration has effectively created a catch and release system that incentivizes illegal entry. Third, Trump accused the administration of deliberately engineering a demographic transformation of the United States, a claim that has drawn sharp rebuke from civil rights organizations. Within hours of Trump's statement, social media erupted with competing narratives. Conservative media outlets amplified the former president's claims, sharing footage of overwhelmed border facilities and testimonies from Border Patrol agents. Progressive media countered with data showing that undocumented immigrants commit crimes at lower rates than native-born citizens and highlighted the humanitarian crisis driving migration from Central America. The information warfare around border policy has become so intense that Americans are essentially living in two different realities. President Biden's team responded through White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre, who called Trump's statements reckless fear-mongering divorced from reality. She pointed to administration efforts to increase border security funding, expand legal pathways for asylum seekers, and work with regional partners to address root causes of migration. The administration highlighted recent decreases in border encounters following new asylum processing rules, arguing that their approach is both more humane and more effective than Trump-era policies. Congressional Republicans rallied behind Trump's assessment. House Speaker Mike Johnson released a statement calling the border situation a national security catastrophe and demanding that the administration restore Trump-era enforcement measures. Senate Republicans introduced emergency legislation that would compel the administration to reinstate Remain in Mexico, expand border wall construction, and dramatically increase detention capacity. Democrats in Congress pushed back forcefully. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer accused Republicans of manufacturing a crisis for political purposes while blocking comprehensive immigration reform. Congressional Progressive Caucus Chair Pramila Jayapal went further, calling Trump's rhetoric white nationalist dog whistling and arguing that the real crisis is America's broken immigration system that fails to provide adequate legal pathways for people fleeing violence and poverty. Expert commentary from immigration policy specialists revealed the complexity beneath the partisan warfare. Doris Meisner, former commissioner of the Immigration and Naturalization Service, noted that both sides are cherry-picking data to support predetermined narratives. She explained that border encounters have indeed increased significantly, but that this reflects a complex mix of factors, including pandemic-related disruptions, deteriorating conditions in Central America and Venezuela, and policy signals from the Biden administration. But the immediate reactions only scratch the surface of what's really happening here. The deep analysis requires understanding the legal and constitutional questions about the respective powers of federal and state governments in immigration enforcement. The Constitution grants the federal government exclusive authority over immigration. Yet states argue they have inherent sovereign authority to protect their territory when federal action is insufficient. This tension has led to an extraordinary legal battle, with Texas and Arizona implementing their own border security measures that the Justice Department has challenged as unconstitutional. Why does this matter? Because we're seeing the potential emergence of a two-tier immigration system where different rules apply in different states, creating legal chaos and potentially violating international treaty obligations. If states can effectively nullify federal immigration policy through their own enforcement actions, it would represent one of the most significant shifts in American federalism in modern history. The humanitarian dimensions often get lost in political rhetoric. According to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, the Western Hemisphere is experiencing its worst displacement crisis in recorded history, with over 7.7 million Venezuelans having fled their country, record violence in Haiti, and devastating poverty in parts of Central America. Many are people fleeing circumstances that would qualify them for asylum under international law. Yet the U.S. asylum system is so backlogged that wait times can exceed 5 years. The economic realities complicate simple enforcement narratives. Multiple economic analyses show that immigrants, including undocumented immigrants, play crucial roles in American agriculture, construction, hospitality, and service industries. The Restaurant Association estimates that 20% of restaurant workers are foreign-born. The American Farm Bureau warns that mass deportations would devastate American agriculture. This creates a fundamental tension, as immigrant labor is economically beneficial to most Americans, while creating localized pressures that drive political backlash. History shows us that moments like these rarely unfold as expected. The modern border enforcement regime essentially begins with the 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act, which created a fundamental mismatch between labor market demands and legal immigration channels. This led to the gradual emergence of a large undocumented population, estimated at 3.2 million by 1986, when President Reagan signed immigration reform, offering amnesty while promising enhanced border security. What followed was a pattern that has repeated itself for nearly 4 decades. Amnesty was implemented, but enforcement measures were underfunded. Border crossings continued. Every administration since has attempted some combination of enforcement and reform, and every attempt has either failed politically or proven insufficient to the challenge. Trump's 2016 campaign made immigration restriction its centerpiece, implementing Remain in Mexico and family separation as deterrents. Biden campaigned on reversing Trump's harshest measures while pursuing comprehensive reform. But border encounters surged and reform legislation went nowhere. This history reveals that comprehensive immigration reform has proven politically impossible for over 3 decades. Enforcement-only approaches don't solve the underlying drivers of migration, and the politics of immigration have become more polarized and weaponized, making compromise increasingly difficult. The geopolitical implications extend throughout the Western Hemisphere. U.S. immigration policy is central to relations with Mexico, America's second-largest trading partner. The Venezuela crisis presents particular complexity, with over 7.7 million people having fled, creating impossible choices about how to handle new arrivals. At the global level, how the U.S. handles its border affects its standing on refugee issues worldwide and gives authoritarian governments ammunition to dismiss U.S. criticism of their human rights practices. The domestic political fallout is reshaping the 2024 electoral landscape. Congressional Republicans have seized on border chaos as their most effective line of attack, with nearly every Republican candidate making immigration central to their campaigns. House Republicans have held dozens of hearings and are building toward potential impeachment of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. Democratic divisions on immigration have become more pronounced. Progressive Democrats have criticized Biden for moving too far toward enforcement, while moderate Democrats in competitive districts have pushed for stronger action. This Democratic divide has prevented unified messaging and created space for Republican attacks. Public opinion trends show immigration rising dramatically as a voter priority. Hispanic voters have shown significant movement toward Republicans, with polls showing they're concerned about border security, disrupting assumptions that they automatically support more generous immigration policies. The economic impacts are more significant than typically acknowledged. The U.S. labor market faces serious contradictions on immigration. Industries from agriculture to construction face significant labor shortages that immigration helps fill. Yet communities receiving large influxes face real costs. The agricultural sector is heavily dependent on immigrant labor, with 50 to 70% of farm workers undocumented. The American Farm Bureau warns that mass deportations would be catastrophic. Yet these economic arguments have limited political traction. The battle over information and narrative has become as significant as the policy battles themselves. Conservative media emphasizes invasion and crisis with constant footage of border crossings. Progressive media emphasizes humanitarian crisis and economic contributions. Mainstream outlets struggle with accusations of bias from both sides. Social media has fragmented information flows even further, with Americans essentially living in different informational realities. Foreign adversaries have recognized the border issue as a pressure point. Russian and Chinese state media amplify divisive content on both sides to deepen American polarization. They highlight the chaos to their domestic audiences as evidence of democratic failure. What happens next depends on variables, from migration flows to court decisions to political calculations. The best case scenario would involve unexpected convergence around practical compromise, but political incentives run strongly against it. The worst case scenario involves escalating confrontation between federal government and border states, leading to constitutional crisis. The most likely scenario is continued muddling through with periodic acute crises, with the 2024 election fought partly on immigration grounds. The key variables to watch are migration flows in the next 6 months, court decisions on state authority, conditions in sending countries, and how Latino voters respond to competing party messages. This brings us to the broader pattern. Immigration has become a proxy for much larger conflicts about American identity, demographic change, economic anxiety, and fundamentally different visions of what America should be. For many Republicans, border enforcement is about sovereignty and rule of law. For many Democrats, generous immigration policies are about American values and human rights. These perspectives are difficult to reconcile because they reflect different values. The reality is that immigration policy involves genuine trade-offs that can't be avoided. A functional immigration system would provide adequate legal channels, real enforcement against employers, pathways for long-settled immigrants, and investment in assimilation. But creating such a system requires political will that doesn't exist because both parties have discovered that immigration is more valuable as a political weapon than as a problem to solve. Trump's latest offensive fits perfectly into this pattern. He's using maximalist rhetoric designed to energize his base and put Biden on defense. Neither side is primarily focused on actually solving the problem, because the political incentive structure rewards conflict over resolution. The key takeaways are these. American immigration policy faces genuine challenges requiring bipartisan commitment that seems impossible. Immigration has become so weaponized that political incentives run against solutions. The issue involves real trade-offs requiring difficult choices about priorities. State-federal tensions are escalating toward potential constitutional crises. American immigration politics reflect fundamental conflicts about national identity, not easily reconciled. Media fragmentation means Americans consume radically different information, making shared understanding extremely difficult. As analysts have noted, the 2024 election will partly turn on how voters assess responsibility for border challenges. What's clear is that immigration will remain central to American political conflict regardless of who wins, because the underlying drivers aren't going away. And this is far from over. The battle Trump has launched is about competing visions of America's future, about the boundaries between state and federal power, about rule of law versus humanitarian obligation, and ultimately, about whether American democracy can still solve collective problems. If you're following this story and want clear, fact-driven analysis, share your thoughts in the comments on what you think the long-term consequences will be. Subscribe for continued coverage and turn on notifications for future updates as this critical story develops.